On this Sunday, when we think in a special way of the joy that the feast of Christmas will bring us as we continue to prepare in Advent, we hear St. Paul write some very beautiful words to us. They speak beautiful words. He says, rejoice. Again, I say to you, rejoice. Have no anxiety at all, but let God give you peace, the peace that will guard you always. What's beautiful about those words, and even somewhat incredible about those words, is Paul wrote those words in prison. That Paul was locked up in prison. We can imagine Paul in chains and in some dark prison cell, locked up, jailed, for preaching the good news. And Paul had his freedom taken away, his physical ability to preach. So he writes a letter to the people that he loved. And he says to them, rejoice. Have no anxiety, no fear. Rejoice. And God will guard you with peace. You know, it's kind of that complex experience that we sometimes have as Christians. You know, the Feast of Christmas that we'll celebrate in a couple of weeks is a feast that tells us that God comes into our life, and God comes into our real life, even into our prisons, even into our jails, even into the places in our life where we feel locked up or limited or without freedom or without the opportunity to do or be what we'd like to do or to be. You know, sometimes as we get older, our own bodies can sometimes feel like a prison, right? Our minds can soar and our minds can be sharp, but sometimes our body begins to give way. And we can feel like we're trapped a little bit in the very body that we have, as it doesn't do what we wish it could do, or sometimes gives us pain or frustrations. And we feel like we're a little bit locked up. You know, sometimes it's emotions in our life, no matter what age in our life, but emotions that make us feel locked up, whether it's anger with someone, whether it's shame, whether it's inability to forgive, or whether it's depression or fear. It sometimes can make us feel like we live a bit in a prison. And sometimes it's even our relationships. Sometimes our family relationships. They're not what we wish they were. You know, and sometimes we could feel, we wish we could change so many things, but we can't. And we find ourselves sometimes feeling a bit limited or locked up. The good news today is St. Paul says to us, even in those places, just like Paul experienced, in those places, God is still present, that Jesus is still there. That's why Paul could say, rejoice. Don't be afraid. And take the peace that God can give you, even in those places that seem farthest from peace. You know, as we listen to these words today of St. Paul, and we listen to his call for us to rejoice, maybe as we prepare for Advent and prepare for Christmas, we remember that we don't always get the release from prisons that we want. Advent teaches us one important thing. Sometimes we have to wait. Sometimes we even struggle with prisons or lack of freedom, and sometimes it's not too easy to leave them. There's no magic solutions to them. Sometimes we struggle with them. We sit with them day after day, and we struggle with them. And yet Paul tells us that even in those places, Jesus is born. Even in those places, Jesus becomes real for us. And so somehow in that incredible hope that we receive during Christmas, we're able to say, we can rejoice. We can even be joyful. We can even be at peace. We can even try to say that fear will not have the end or the last word. You know, St. Paul, if we think about him today, had an experience of Jesus who was risen. Paul had an experience, and Paul knew that Jesus, whose body was broken in death, who was placed in the tomb, that even in that tomb that locked Jesus up, that God's love was real. And Paul had an experience of Jesus. The Jesus he knew had died, he saw him alive. And so Paul was able to say in confidence in his own life, despite my prison, despite what takes away freedom from me or opportunity, despite the things that stop me from being or doing what I want to do or be, I know that God is here. I know that God is here. And so as we celebrate this Eucharist today, we ask the Lord to fill our hearts with joy, with a bit of joy that only God can give us, and to really trust that just as God works so powerfully in the life of Jesus, that God again is reborn in all of our life, in our strengths, in our light, and also in those places that we struggle with that sometimes make us feel as if we are locked in prisons and locked without the freedom that we wish we had.